I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my horror house. I find myself very excited for the upcoming release of the new Scream movie, so I guess pandering to nostalgia really does work. It has sent me back to watch the first 4 Scream movies in quick succession, and I wanted to talk about them in short order. They're really enjoyable, fun, kind of lightweight horror, pop horror movies that you can burn your way through. So I thought let's just burn my way through 4 sort of reviews of them. It was really fun returning to the first movie. A lot is made about the legacy of Scream and what Scream did. We'll maybe talk about that at the end of the video. What I will say at the start is that 1996's Scream has one of the strongest openings of any movie, let alone horror movie, I've ever seen. It set a foundation that went so deep and so strong that I actually think that the start of this movie and the very end of this movie are the 2 core foundation stones that the entire franchise has been built on. You have a setup with Drew Barrymore home, alone, waiting for her boyfriend to turn up and watch some scary movies when someone calls on the phone, and it's a stranger, and he starts asking her questions. Most memorably of all, what's your favourite scary movie? And the scene just builds and builds. The tension ratchets up. I remember when it just pivots and the voice on the phone says, what do you want? I want to see what your insides look like. And I remember the first time I saw that, the pit just dropped out of my stomach. I went, oh shit, this is getting real. Then it gets realer, then it gets realer. And then Drew is killed. I think Wes Craven must have a real esteem for Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, because this opening calls to mind the death of Tina Amanda Weiss's character in Nightmare on Elm Street, and of course going back to Janet Leigh in Psycho, your big name star Drew Barrymore at the time gets offed. Even in even shorter order than it does in Psycho, I met Amanda Weiss at a convention a few years back, and it struck me, it hadn't struck me before, but it struck me in her 10x8, how much she looked like Janet Leigh did in Psycho. And she said, yeah, Wes absolutely wanted me to be the Janet Leigh of A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I think he's done it again here with Drew Barrymore. The opening is so solid. It sets the scenario, it sets the rules the killer is playing by, it sets the MO of the killer, the look of the killer, what we can expect from the rest of the film, and also with that final sort of fade as she, dying, pulls the mask off and sees who it is, but we don't see, sets up the mystery of who is the killer. And that is the absolute strength of the premise, Kevin Williamson's brilliant, I think, premise. Much more so than all the meta stuff. A lot is made about how meta Scream is. I mean, the kids in the movie understand horror movies and they've seen the same horror movies. Some of them have seen the same horror movies that we've seen. That doesn't mean that this is an elevated horror movie. It doesn't really do anything different with those rules, and it plays by them when it wants to and breaks them when it wants to, because it's nominally set in the real world. If you want a movie that's truly a horror movie that truly plays around with the idea of meta text, then Wes Craven's New Nightmare does that much more intricately and in much more detail. I said this was a sort of fun pop and pop culture kind of movie, and so it is, and I think it plays around with that metatextuality on that level and doesn't really go any deeper than that, and it doesn't need to. A factor of growing ever older by the day is watching a movie that I saw first here when it came out in the cinema and thinking, oh my god, they're all so young. Where has my time gone? I am Methuselah. The cast of Scream are probably the best ensemble cast in any of the Scream movies. So Neve Campbell, Skeet Ulrich, Jamie Kennedy, Rose McGowan, and Matthew Lillard. Matthew Lillard in Scream. Please. They all work so well together. They gel completely. I understand that they hung out a lot, and you can really tell they do riff off each other. They do seem really comfortable together. I absolutely buy them as a group of friends, with some of them being friends of friends or friends of girlfriends. It just works. They click in a way that I don't think any other ensemble does, apart from, and we'll get to that in another video, maybe the school kids in Scream 4. But these guys are a dream to watch. Mobile phones, I think it's fair to say, is a wooden stake in the heart of a lot of horror. Ever since mobile phones came out, you have to try and work your way around the why doesn't someone just? Why don't you just? Which leads, unfortunately, to an awful lot of scenes of people holding up their mobile phones and saying, the mandatory, I can't get a signal. One of the things I love about Scream is it makes a virtue of what is a weakness everywhere else, and puts sort of mobile phone technology front and centre at the middle of exactly what's going on. Everyone still has a landline. There are a lot of landlines in all the Scream movies. My American friends, can you tell me, are landlines still a thing, or were they still a thing in the early 2000s and even the 2010s as we get into the sequels, as they are in Scream? Because pretty much in the UK no one has a landline anymore. They kind of don't exist. They're a complete anachronism. But are they still kind of a thing in the States? I'd be really fascinated to know. So the technology and some of the fashions pin this to its time, the mid-90s. But the rest of the way the movie is shot really means it has aged phenomenally well. It's really wide, by the way. The black bars at the top and the bottom of my screen were really noticeable. I'd forgotten quite what a wide aspect ratio these first few Scream movies have. The camera's very fluid. It glides all over the place. The editing is, it's not showy, it's not flashy. I was going to say it's sort of standard editing. It doesn't intrude like an awful lot of editing in the early 90s. That whole decade really did. The MTV effect has made an awful lot of films like just looking across the room there, Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows, is so MTV-ified that even though there's the nugget of a really good story in there, now in the third decade of the 21st century, it's really hard to dig down into it through all the visual tinsel that's going on that just makes it look really of its time. None of the Scream movies went in for any of that kind of flash. I think Wes at the helm just wanted to make a straight down the road horror movie, probably with his eye to Psycho in the past and his own films of the past and his own legacy, and trying to do something new. And it really shows, and it has aged really well because of that, in my opinion. That doesn't mean that when we jump to Randy in the video store, there's not a part of me during that excellent scene where he explains some of the sort of meta setup, that I'm not sitting there going, oh, I miss video stores. I really do miss video stores. One of the other things I really like about Scream, and they've taken it through into all of the sequels, is that Ghostface really takes his licks. He gets hit, he falls over. Sometimes he takes a shot to the nuts. Some of the Ghostfaces, you can hear them as they fall down and take their tumbles. It is definitely a person beneath the mask, and sometimes that person gets the shit kicked out of them, and I really dig that. It's just not something that you see often. Ultimately, though, one of the reasons I think that the film was so successful was that the concept was solid. It is, to my mind, much more giallo than slasher. The mystery whodunit element throughout all the Scream movies is so strong. So that mystery element and the revelation at the end is pure giallo rather than just a conveyor belt of slasher victims to be hacked up. And it has to be said that given how light the Scream movies are, sort of the unmasking and the unveiling at the end, they're kind of like bloody Scooby-Doo movies. And I tend to watch them on that level and really enjoy them on that level. There's not much depth to them, and I don't need there to be much depth to them. Even all the references to real life films and sequels and rules and stuff like that, and sort of snarky comments about real world people, and even playing on the lives of the real world actors who are playing the characters in, especially Gail Weathers, Courtney Cox. I think all of that stuff is just sort of like surface glitter for me. I don't think there's any real deep meaning to dig down on it. It's fluffy, it's light, it's breezy, it's fun, it's tense when it needs to be tense, and it really does the job. Talking of the unmasking then, and what I think is an excellent revelation that there are two killers rather than one. Skeet Ulrich and Matthew Lillard excel in this final scene. I think they're absolutely magnificent. I think that their performances are so strong that even though neither of them return, those scenes with Neve Campbell, Matthew Lillard and Skeet Ulrich at the very end are what created the Scream franchise. And even though you don't have your killers returning, which is really weird, isn't it? To have a sort of a slasher, a stabby killer franchise where the killer never returns. And again, they've made a strength, a virtue out of what could have been a weakness, because each installment we get a new mystery, a new set of suspects, but we get to keep as an absolute through line, unaltered, the iconography of Ghostface remains intact. So we can have an iconic look for a killer and an iconic sort of MO, a really easily understandable, welcome, familiar MO. But each time it's something slightly different, and we have to play the whodunit game again. It's received wisdom that the 90s was a bad time for horror, or the early 90s, and Scream was a shot in the arm for horror. I don't necessarily buy into that. What you do see, certainly your big pop franchises, your Friday the 13th, your Nightmare on Elm Street, were definitely on the wane. And you do see, specifically in America and the West, horror filmmakers scouring around for the next franchise. There's a real sort of potpourri, a real sort of mixed bag of stuff coming out. Things like Darkness Falls, the Boogeyman, weird kind of stuff that's almost as if, almost like flashcards being held up to you. What about this? You up for this? What about this? This one, is this the next big one you're going to jump on board? And Scream came along with an excellent concept, an excellent look, an excellent ensemble cast, excellent script by Kevin Williamson, helmed by an excellent director, and I just think it landed. It landed so well, and it was so perfectly executed that it set that franchise off. It also sort of course-corrected horror for the rest of the decade and beyond, and the second half of the 90s and into the early 2000s became Scream Light. It became sort of like Scream clones, the urban legends, I Know What You Did Last Summer's, sort of to the detriment of Scream's legacy, I feel. Blair Witch did exactly the same thing, though. After Blair Witch, horror cinema, Western horror cinema, absolutely course-corrected and oversaturated with found footage, and just took the wrong pieces, I think. Took the obvious pieces from Blair Witch, and I think the Pretenders took the obvious pieces from Scream. Oh, okay, so we get a group of really pretty teens. Some of them might be from sort of TV soaps or sort of young adult TV dramas, and we'll put those TV stars into a movie and we'll have them picked off one by one. That's what Scream is, yeah? Well, on the surface, that's what Scream is. What Scream also is a really damn good bloody story, told well and produced brilliantly. While I have spotty love for some of the Scream clones, I actually think that all of the Scream movies rose to the top. They are sort of the cream of that weird sort of cultural shift. I think the Scream movies are the best of all of them, so over the next 4 videos we'll be talking about Scream 1 through to 4. 3 is going to be really interesting because that's the one I liked the least, but next up, obviously. And another thing I really appreciate, they're called Scream. Scream 2, Scream 3, Scream 4, until the new one, which really is Scream 5. So next up, Scream 2. A quick afterthought, and I'm aware that I am probably most closely aligned to Randy in the movie Scream, but when they're at the party and they're watching Halloween, one of the things that always bugged me was that whenever it cuts back to John Carpenter's Halloween, the clips are all out of order. I mean... I miss video stores. I really do miss video stores.